joining us again. My name is Cameron Conant. I am the Communications Officer for Operation Noah, and really happy to be with you tonight. We're going to get started in just a moment. I'd first like to introduce our host for the evening, our chair for this online meeting, and that is Dr. Lorna Gold. Now, some of you may be familiar with Lorna. She's done lots of things. I'm just going to give you a snapshot. But Lorna is the incoming executive director of the Laudato Si Movement, which is an amazing network of 900 Catholic organizations and grassroots activists working for environmental justice. Lorna has held the role of board chair at the Laudato Si Movement since 2020. She's also worked as CEO of Faith Invest, which is a group we've worked closely with at Operation Noah. It's a UK-based NGO that supports faiths to invest their assets for the benefit of people and planet. Prior to these roles, Lorna led Tracare's policy, research and advocacy, and led several high-impact campaigns for fossil fuel divestment in Ireland. She's previously acted as an advisor on climate communications to the Irish government and holds a PhD in economic geography from the University of Glasgow. She's published widely on climate action, faith, and regenerative economics, particularly thinking of her 2018 book, Climate Generation, Awakening to Our Children's Future, which was republished in 2023 and described by Naomi Klein, of all people, as an anguished journey into the heart of the climate crisis. So I'm really pleased to welcome and hand over to Dr. Lorna Gold.
Thanks, Cameron. It's great to be here with you all, and I have to give a special shout out to the Laudato Si animators who I know have come to join this meeting this evening. So my job is to chair and hopefully not hog the floor, because I'm sure lots of people have plenty to be saying tonight. So a couple of housekeeping matters. So you'll see you're on mute because we're quite a big group, and after the formal meeting is ended, everybody will be unmuted so that you can have an informal chat with people. But we're going to try and keep on mute so that we can get through the agenda. And then for the Q&A, we're going to manage the Q&A with the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have your full screen on, you'll see it. It's under where it says more. You'll see Q&A, and that's where you put your questions. You can put your chat in the chat and put your questions in the Q&A so that we can find the questions quite easily. So that's really it in terms of housekeeping. We're going to have a reflection, and then we're going to have some background on the campaign, and then another piece around practicalities of how we as Christians can be involved in this really important campaign. So just to get us started, just a very brief kind of setting this in context. Where are we? It's so timely for us as Christians to come together this evening. I'm sure I'm not the only one who is finding the start of this year deeply troubling in terms of everything that's going on in the world. And two pieces of news that came through to me today. First one, that the most important observatory, science observatory, the NOAA Earth Observatory out of the US, has been taken offline. We're literally heading into uncharted territory when it comes to understanding the climate crisis from a science point of view. And the other piece of news that came out today is that January is the warmest January on record. And we get kind of blasé about all these records being broken, but to break a record in the middle of a La Nina, which is meant to be the cooling period of the Earth, is really troubling, amongst all the other troubles we're facing. So we come together here as Christians and people who share the Christian ethos to really ask what it is that we can do and what our faith is asking us to do in the midst of this. And at the weekend, I was preaching up in Belfast, and the analogy that came to mind for me was of Jesus and the disciples in the boat in the middle of a really, really terrible storm, because it feels like that to us all right now. And it can feel to us that we're crying out, Jesus, do you not care if we drown? And yet we're being asked to step forward and to find that presence and that peace and that will to take action in the midst of this storm. So as we gather today, let us pray. Dear Lord, you were there when the disciples felt scared during the storm. You rebuked the waves and calmed the wind. You showed your divine power. We ask you to be with us this evening as we come together to deepen our understanding of the climate crisis and the urgent need to end our dependence on fossil fuels. We ask you to be with us and to help us to feel your presence among us, like a stillness in the midst of the storm, so that we may give witness through our lives and commit ourselves to building your kingdom. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Our first speaker this evening is Bishop Rosemarie Mallet, who may be known to many of you. She was born in Barbados and came to the United Kingdom as a child. Before ordination, she was a research sociologist and academic, specialising in international development and ethnocultural mental health. Amongst many other things, she is a spokesperson on racial and social justice issues nationally and is chair of the oversight group for the Church Commissioner's work on African chattel enslavement and reparatory justice. For more than 20 years, Bishop Rosemarie has served as trustee and director on several social action charities across London, all focused on building community cohesion. Bishop Rosemarie, we look forward to hearing you to inspire us on how we can take action and based on gospel and based on the teaching of Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your welcome this evening. And I'm going to say I feel like a bit of a fraud, or I've got imposter syndrome as I sit here, because I'm not too sure about my credentials. I was going to say, start by saying we in the Church of England and in the Anglican Communion, which is the churches that are connected to the Church of England out in the greater areas of the world. We've got something called the 5 marks of mission, and the first two of those are about teaching and preaching the gospel and bringing people to a greater understanding of the gospel. And then the third one is about caring for people. The fourth one is about working to transform unjust structures, which clearly are part of the remit of what we're here to talk about. And the fifth one is about treasuring God's creation. And I was going to start by saying when I was a parish priest, and I remember we'd talk about the 5th mark of mission, those of us who were joining together would sit there and scratch our heads and think, now what are we doing besides talking about changing light bulbs and maybe using recycled paper? Because we just couldn't think from the local to the global as to how we could try to really make a difference to the world around us, because most of the challenges seem to be out there and not close to us, apart from some of those very small, meaningful in some places, but small things that we could focus on. And I think one of the things that I've come from that to say is that wherever people are, and this is a Jesus message, you meet them on the road to wherever they are, and any of the journeys that we would want people to take around their understanding of environmental issues and the absolute urgent need to save God's created order and his planet. You find where people are and try to bring them along on the journey. Now, just a little bit about where I am. I am the Bishop of Croydon, which is in South Croydon occupies South London and East Surrey. So we have both inner city and rural areas as part of the diocese, the area that I oversee. We have, in about 2023, the Church of England and the diocese made a decision to divest from fossil fuels as part of our commitment to tackling the climate crisis and safeguarding creation. And our commitment to do so was through this fifth mark of mission, which I've mentioned, is about the church leading in caring for the earth and protecting God's people. And one of the ways in which I felt the need to step up to the plate in terms of what I could do is I recognize that in a large number of our churches, people felt that either it was more than they could understand and deal with, and in some of our churches, people felt that actually it's not their concern because as God created the order, so God would make the decisions as to what to do with the order he created. And so we had some people then saying that's not a church responsibility. So now it feels like it's about 7 or 8 years ago, and Melanie is part of this group. I worked with a member of Christian Aid to bring together a number of ministers, pastors, lay members from Black-led churches, because what we had discovered or felt that often in those churches, there was less preaching and teaching on the environment and on the climate crisis. So we brought together about 100 people to talk about these issues and to show the link between racial justice and climate justice, and to show what you all know is that butterfly effect of what happens in one place having a massive impact in other places, whether that's going from the local to the global, or whether it's coming the other way. The ripple effect of our actions is so important, and we need to understand it. So that group continues, and there have been some amazing successes in getting people to come together and to recognize the importance of the work. As a church and as a diocese, some of the ways in which we have come to look at how we help people understand and work with environmental issues and climate justice is, and I know you know this work well, but it's using working alongside in partnership with A Rocha and just equipping churches to see how they could care for creation at the local level in their buildings, in their community engagement, and in their lifestyles. But as I say, meeting them where they are rather than setting parameters that they felt that they couldn't meet. So encouraging them to be involved. Subsequently, the National Church and the diocese have said that we are going to try to make our buildings energy efficient and our heating energy efficient, and to reach net zero by 2030, 2035. So these are absolute platforms that we are standing on. And the reason why we feel it's important to do this, and I don't need to tell you, is that the Bible teaches us to seek justice and to care for our brothers and sisters. And that's our brothers and sisters, not just our neighbors next door, but our neighbors across the world. And we don't believe that we can do that without calling for an end to fossil fuel projects which destroy their land, their livelihoods, and contribute to extreme weather events, which disproportionately clearly affect the global majority world. I was born in Barbados and consider myself very much still part of the Barbadian community. And very much we have a prime minister who leads out on these issues. And we are clear that the impact of the environmental crisis will impact on developing countries and small islands, such as the one I come from, much more so, and earlier on, that it will impact across the world. So I think the ways in which we work together in partnership, and that's why I think in my biography profile, you see that I'm very much on building partnerships and working collaboratively. And I think that's the only way that we can really build and bring about change. And I think I just want to kind of end by saying I was talking to our a climate justice officer, and that we have the pleasure in our diocese to have staff, 3 members of staff that are working around issues of climate justice and environmental justice and racial justice working together. And what we were noticing is that in our outer Surrey, outer London churches, it's much easier to get this message across and to encourage people to see what they can do to help make a difference, to join. Helen is online, to get people to join in the protests, to join in the campaigning, to join in the advocacy. We find that that's a much more difficult process in our inner city churches, as people feel either through their time commitments or just lack of knowledge or being unable to see how it impacts on them. We recognize that there's a need for us to work with our inner city churches, our inner urban churches, so that we can build that knowledge and build that consensus, so that, and I say this looking at myself and the screen, so that the ways in which we work collaboratively makes it look like everybody, the diverse and marvelous kingdom of God, are also part of this story, as opposed to the way it currently can feel and look as if it's almost being taken up and taken on by one part of our society and not another part of our society. And we're very keen to try to ensure that the message is conveyed to all, and that all people feel that they are part of the journey towards the kind of net zero, the journey towards stopping investing in fossil fuels, but that they understand what it means and why it's important for their lives and for their children's lives and for their grandchildren's lives as well. And we don't feel that we're quite making that argument well enough. And for us, that is an important part of the next bit of the project, that we feel that we need to ensure people understand much more so these issues of justice and climate justice, racial justice, and the way that works to enable us to care for God's creation and to restore his lovely planet, and our responsibility for stewardship. So that's kind of where I would, a little bit about me, a little bit about the work we do, and a little bit about why it's so important for us as a church to be involved, but recognizing that there are challenges in terms of bringing more people on board and needing to find ways to encourage greater participation from more diverse communities.
Thank you very much, Bishop Rosemarie. That was really, really helpful and really interesting to hear about that journey, the journey that really has to start with meeting people where they're at, and the challenge that comes with that, and the challenge in different communities that brings. Such a rich contribution to, and you're not an imposter here. I think everybody here recognises that intersection between racial justice, social justice, and climate justice. And it's only if we start to work together in a cross-sectoral way that we will start to see change. So if anybody has questions, start to think about questions for Bishop Rosemarie, please put them in the Q&A, and we will start to kind of harvest those questions, and so that we don't have time lags after our other speakers. I'd now like to turn to our 2 next speakers, who are going to talk to us specifically about the whole campaigning for an end to fossil fuel projects. Bishop Rosemarie talked about how this journey of faith, journey of engagement on social justice, on racial justice, on community work, led the church, her church, to recognise that we also need to engage in campaigning, and we need to call for an end to fossil fuel projects. We need to speak truth to power, in other words. So the two people we have now, Lauren and Susie, no better people to talk to us about that, the campaigning aspect. So Lauren is the lead campaigner in the Stop Rosebank campaign, and she joined Uplift, who's one of the partners on that campaign, in 2022. And she works to coordinate large-scale mobilisations and campaigns against new oil and gas. Uplift, as we all know, have a track record in high-profile campaigns, and Lauren herself has a track record in public speaking and extensive experience in all aspects of campaigning. Susie Shingler, is that how you pronounce your name? Is the campaign manager for Stop Rosebank, and again is a really seasoned campaigner, involved in working, she can tell us herself, but working to prevent oil rigs, to prevent the expansion of oil in the North Sea. She specialises in leading and developing successful campaigns, and she previously managed campaigns at the Environmental Justice Foundation, the Alliance to Save Our Antibiotics, and the Soil Association. So over to you two to tell us about the Stop Rosebank campaign and the Christian Coalition.
Thanks so much, Lorna. And any questions about my odd-sounding employment history, please pop them in the Q&A. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us here this evening. Really looking forward to telling you a bit more about Stop Rosebank, the network, the campaign, and some really exciting news that there's been some big developments in the last week. So this is very good timing to be chatting with you all. Before we get stuck in, as well as introducing ourselves, I should introduce Rosebank to you a little bit. You may have heard the name knocking around over the past couple of years, but Rosebank doesn't actually exist yet. We're trying to stop it from existing. So it is the largest undeveloped oil field in the North Sea off the coast of Shetland. It's an oil field that is majority owned by Equinor, which is Norway's pretty much state oil company. Kids are shouting downstairs. They're always a nice background in these evening calls. And there's a minority owner as well, Ithaca Energy, that is listed in the UK. The Rosebank is absolutely enormous. It's got 500 million barrels of oil underneath it. It would be an absolute climate disaster if all of that oil were drilled and burned. There's the arguments against it are enormous. There's no good long-term stable jobs to be had from it. It wouldn't make our bills lower. It wouldn't make the UK's energy security any better. It would cost the taxpayers billions in tax subsidies, and overall it's a really terrible deal for the people of the UK and for the climate. It's really being pushed by the oil industry. So that's kind of who we're up against with this fight here. We focus very much on Rosebank as a particular field fight because it is the biggest one. So what happens with Rosebank kind of will set a precedent for the rest of the North Sea. And there's a huge amount in flux and a lot to play for at the moment, which we'll kind of come to. A week ago, we won an incredible court case. The campaign to stop Rosebank has been going for a little over 2 years. And then in September 23, the previous government approved it for development, which meant they basically gave the green light to the oil companies to get going with the work. So when they approved it, we filed a petition to take the government to court to challenge that approval. And that was in December 23. And then throughout 2024, something quite remarkable happened. An incredible group of campaigners in Surrey took Surrey County Council to court to challenge a much smaller terrestrial oil field based on the fact that when the environmental statement, the environmental impact assessment, was submitted as part of the project, the county council didn't take into account the carbon emissions that would come from the oil that would obviously be burned. And they won the case, called the Finch case, named after the incredible Sarah Finch, the member of the Wheeled Action Group, that filed that case. So after that, we felt incredibly excited and confident that when we took Rosebank to court, we would be successful on the same ground. And that is what happened. It's quite remarkable. This has never happened before. It's unprecedented. There's never been an approved oil field up in court that's then had its approval quashed. So it's quite extraordinary. I think the last couple of slides were just showing you some of the headline news that came out. It was a media day, I think, unlike any campaign I've ever worked on, that most campaigners have ever worked on. It was headline news. It was on the actual evening news, and it's been discussed to death across the tabloids, the broadsheets, online news channels. It's just been the most extraordinary response to it. And we're still I think we're still coming down from it a little bit, from all of the the intense moment that was. But it's an enormous victory for the climate movement, and it is hopefully a nice piece of hope for everyone that is working on these issues, that we can actually come together and we can turn this around. And people power has been an incredible force behind this up to this point. So just a little bit more on the court case and what it actually means in practice. So now Rosebank still doesn't exist, and now it's unapproved. But the oil companies are very likely to want to try and get it reapproved again. But this time, when they send in their paperwork, they're going to have to include the carbon emissions that would be burnt from its 500 million barrels of oil. And then the government are going to have to look at that and then look at our legally binding climate commitments and try and find a way to square the two. So what we're hoping is that the government rejects Rosebank when it goes back for approval squarely on these carbon emission grounds. So that's very exciting. What the judge said in the ruling was that if they wanted to, and at their own risk, Equinor and Ithaca are welcome to keep preparing some of the infrastructure for the field at their own risk, but they are not allowed to drill anything. So it really is all off the cards at the moment. And just on that bottom point there, the judge said this most lovely thing, where it's now recognised in law that us as members of the public, our interest in tackling climate change outweighs the private interest of companies to make money, which feels common sense, but it's just lovely to have it recognised now in our own law. So this has all come at a really interesting time as well. There is a context that sits around this court case win that almost makes it doubly exciting. So because of the incredible outcome of the Finch case last year, the government has then had to open a consultation to figure out how to deal with the fact that they've still got active licenses for fossil fuel projects open in the North Sea, and they are going to get more applications to open infrastructure on those fields to drill for oil and gas. But how do they do it when now they're going to be taking the carbon emissions into account? Campaigning around a public consultation on a piece of technical and potentially quite dry technical information. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but we had the most incredible response to this consultation from the biggest, most diverse cross-section of society. And it meant that into this consultation, hundreds, maybe thousands of submissions went in from people but all across the country, and I think even some international submissions as well, really putting forward the scientific case for stopping new oil and gas. We had open letters to the Prime Minister that I think a number of the organisations here signed on to, which got some fantastic press coverage to really highlight the issue at the very time the consultation was ongoing. And we managed to pull together a number of oil and gas focused petitions with 400,000 signatures on, and we put that into the consultation as well. So what we were really trying to do was to demonstrate how broad and diverse the opposition to new oil and gas is. So even though it's not always that exciting campaigning around a government process, I think we used it as an opportunity to just really demonstrate what the opposition looked like. And if one consultation wasn't exciting enough, there's another one coming, another government consultation, which is due out any moment, which is going to be asking for public views on oil and gas licensing, which is a different kettle of fish to the approvals, which is the thing Rosebank is sort of in the air about at the moment. But before the Labour Party won the election, they had a manifesto commitment not to hand out any new oil and gas licenses, which is a very positive, excellent thing. So they're doing a consultation, which we are guessing is going to be largely about how to help the workforce transition from the oil and gas industry to renewables, because that needs to be done fairly compassionately, sensibly, and quite quickly as well. So as soon as that's out, we'll be looking at what sort of public response might be suitable for that to sort of really keep the pressure on. So just looking back a little bit over the past week, and about why this is such an opportune moment for anyone to be active in the fight against oil and gas, is I don't think there has ever been such a strong and overt political discourse about oil and gas at any point in the Rosebank campaign yet. When the approval happened, that was pretty big, but that was nothing like what it's been like over this past week. So this week we had Rosebank top of the agenda, Prime Minister's questions. Keir Starmer, Kemi Badenoch had a head-to-head over it. It was quite something. And pretty much every paper has been running a story that's either to do with Rosebank itself, the future of the North Sea, the extraordinary profits that Equinor, Rosebank's owner, posted yesterday, and their announcement to roll back on their renewables commitments, which was shameful. So at the moment, it is all to play for on oil and gas, and we have got, as campaigning organisations and people that want to see a better future, it's all open. So I think Lauren is going to chat us through some really nice ideas about what we can do.
Hi everyone, thank you so much, Susie. So as many of you will be aware, as committed and dedicated activists, none of what has been achieved has happened by accident. It has happened due to a highly organised and coordinated network of people around the country coming together to campaign for their shared aim. The Stop Rosebank campaign is made up of hundreds of thousands of individuals, hundreds of groups, whether grassroots or organisations, across Scotland, the rest of the UK, and also globally. All of these groups and individuals are dedicated together to ending all new oil and gas extraction and bringing existing production within safe climate limits, because we all know that we cannot have any new fossil fuel projects if we are to retain any shot of having a safe, livable climate in the future. That is what is bringing us all here and underpinning all of our work and underpinning our togetherness in this campaign, is that we all know that this project cannot go ahead, that new fossil fuel projects cannot go ahead if we are to have a safe planet to live on in the future. So this network started in 2021 when the COP26 UN Climate Summit was taking place in Glasgow around a campaign to stop the Campbell oil field, which was another proposed offshore oil development that was being pushed through the approval process by the then Conservative government under Boris Johnson. And due to the COP26 climate summit coming at the same time of this massive new oil project being pushed through the approval process, Campbell became a lightning rod for controversy in the media, and we saw unprecedented opposition to opening up new oil and gas projects on the one hand, while on the other hand, the Conservative government was claiming climate leadership in hosting this UN climate summit. Shortly after these UN talks, Shell, the owner of Campbell, dropped out of the field, and to this day, the 170 million barrels of oil in the Campbell oil field remain in the ground 3.5 years later. We then went on to campaign against the Jackdaw gas field, which was a very difficult campaign to run during a gas price crisis, I should add. But during 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, our job was really to combat the government and industry narratives that new oil and gas would keep us safe from future price shocks and energy security shocks. Our job was to dispel those myths and to bring the climate argument back up the political agenda during this crisis, and also prove that new oil and gas is not the solution to lower bills and energy security. The solution to that is cheap homegrown renewables. So during that year, a lot of our work was quite an uphill battle in rebutting these claims that were coming from the government. And then Equinor, the Norwegian state-owned oil giant, as Susie mentioned, submitted its application to develop Rosebank. And since then, when that happened in September 2022, we have been campaigning fiercely against Equinor's Rosebank project as a coalition. So over the past few years, hundreds of thousands of people have shown their opposition to Rosebank and urged the government to reject all new oil and gas developments outright. This coalition includes over 700 scientists and experts, 400 organizations, a range of celebrities, including Frankie Boyle, Joe Lycett, Naomi Klein, Christiana Figueres, and many others. We have trade unionists who are calling for the need for secure long-term jobs in renewables. With our dwindling oil and gas basin, we are coming together with trade unions and calling for our common grounds of wanting to protect workers and see a prosperous renewable industry in this country. We've had the privilege of working with you all as the many faith leaders behind this campaign. We also have seen vast opposition from every major political party in the UK and from over 40 members of the European Parliament as well. So lots of people want Rosebank to stop. And now that we have won our court case, the work is not over. In fact, it's now more important than ever that we make sure that going forward, the government makes the right decision and stops the field for good. So now that we have won our court case, it is as if the decision to approve Rosebank never happened. So that decision to approve it has been reduced. Rosebank does not have the field does not have the permissions that it needs for the oil and gas companies to drill and extract the oil. But once this consultation period that Susie mentioned has finished, the decision to reapprove Rosebank or to reject it once and for all would be back on the government's desk in the coming months. And as we've seen in the media this week, there is a very live debate within the UK government on whether they will make the right choice and reject the field or whether they will wave it through despite their legally binding climate commitments. So over the next few months, while we are waiting for the government to publish its outcome from its consultation process, and while we're waiting for Equinor to resubmit its application to develop the field, it is more important than ever that we, as local constituents and as members of our local communities, put pressure on our MPs and MSPs if you live in Scotland to make sure that every single parliamentary representative knows how much their constituents want to see Rosebank stopped and want an end to all new oil and gas extraction. So the next number one thing that you can do to support the campaign to stop Rosebank and all new oil and gas projects is to get involved in our MP and MSP Week of Action, which will be taking place from the 3rd to the 9th of March. This Week of Action will bring together people up and down the country who will meet their elected representatives face-to-face and request a face-to-face meeting with their MP and or their MSPs during this Week of Action. I can pop the link to sign up for that in the chat, but I believe that the hosts will also send that out following the call. So I'll do that once I finish speaking. And we would like to highlight that if you've not met with your MP or your MSP in person before, if you've even not emailed your MP before, although most of you probably have in this room, don't worry, like it's okay to not know how to do this. We have organised a series of trainings in conjunction with Hope for the Future, which are a brilliant organisation that specialises in helping people to feel empowered to meet with their MP and their MSP on progressive issues and to have a productive, impactful meeting. We're running 3 training sessions on the week of the 17th of February to arm everyone with the skills and the resources that they need for these meetings. Again, I'll make sure that everyone gets the sign-up links for those trainings. We will give you all the resources that you need to participate in this. The main ask that we're asking people to bring to their MPs and MSPs in the meeting is to sign the Stop Rosebank Pledge. So currently we have 8 MPs and 6 MSPs who have signed officially their support for the Stop Rosebank campaign and pledged to take further action in support of our aims. It is incredibly crucial that we do get MP and MSP support. I'd like to highlight a particularly poignant example of how crucial it is to get our MPs and our MSPs on board and the power that we have as local constituents. You know, our MSPs and our MPs work for us and they are obliged to meet their constituents and hear their concerns, the things that matter most to them, and to represent those concerns in Parliament. What we have seen as a result of people continuously reaching out to their MPs, continuously raising this issue, is that many MPs are actually willing to put pressure on the Labour government to make the right call. So this week we saw that the Prime Minister has been facing growing internal backlash from within the Labour Party over the potential reapproval of Rosebank. Labour MPs have been describing it as a breaking point in relations within the party and are calling for Keir Starmer to stand by the party's manifesto commitments. Again, this is not something that has happened by accident. It has happened because of tireless, dedicated campaigning and pushing this issue up the political agenda of our MPs and our MSPs. And a result of that is that, as we can see in the quote here, former Shadow Ministers Sarah Champion and Barry Gardiner both said that the government must rule out any further development and that approving the Rosebank operation is simply not compatible with our climate goals, and that it is a test to whether the Chancellor was willing to abide by her manifesto commitment. So we can see really clearly here that us asking our MPs to raise the issue in Parliament, to provide quotes for the press, to post supportive comments on social media, it really, really does make a difference in this crucial moment of decision within the Labour Party. That is everything that I wanted to tell you about today. I believe that I'm going to pass back to the chair now and then we'll have questions later. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Lauren. Not Melanie. Got mixed up there. So thank you to both of you for sharing that such an inspiring example, and I think we really need to hear those stories today. Such powerful story of people power working, and change coming, but also really a plea to us all to say we can't give up at this point. We've had a victory. It's like a milestone on the journey, but we really need to keep up the pressure and to be continuing to work. And it does work. It does work. I know from my own experience as well, working on these issues, it really has an impact, that continuous pressure on MSPs and MPs. So we're now going to move to the question of how can we as churches, as Christians, be involved in this campaign. So we're going to turn to Melanie, and if you don't mind, I'm not going to give a long introduction because we're running a bit over, and we'll put Melanie's bio into, Melanie's known by lots of you, I'm sure. We'll put Melanie's bio into the chat so that people can read about it. But Melanie, you're going to talk to us about how we can get involved in going forward.
Thank you, Lorna. And you don't need a bio. I work with Christian Climate Action, and I'm also the church's engagement officer for Green Christian. I think that's probably all you really need to know. I just wanted to start by saying that we need to put this in some kind of context. The scientific consensus, for those of you that have been following scientific papers and listening perhaps to Johan Rockström at Davos, is that humanity is rapidly exiting the safe operating space that Earth provides. We are actually heading to where the road runs out without lifting our foot off the accelerator, let alone braking. And this is why Rosebank is so important. If we really believe that God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, we need to work for that outcome. And we need to take up the challenge that Bishop Rosemarie has given us of meeting people where they are. Because if we're to take people on this journey with us, and if we're to recognize that politicians won't act unless we take people on this journey with us, then we have to do the work that enables us to come on this journey. And so I wanted to tell you about some of the things that we have created, some of the opportunities that enable us to bring people on this road. The first thing I just wanted to say to you is that if you're affiliated with one of our partner organizations, do check out what they're saying about it and join any campaigns that they have on this issue. And you'll see the partner organizations up there. There are more joining us in this campaign every day. And the most recent one is Eco Congregation Scotland. So thank you to everyone who's come from any of those organizations, because talking about this issue, talking to other people in our movements, talking to our friends and our neighbors, and just getting the word out about this is probably the most important thing we can do. Let's have a look at some of the things that we're going to offer. Ruth, could I just have the next slide? So we are starting with an Ash Wednesday service in London. That's 11 a.m. At St. John's Waterloo. It's going to be a simple service of reflection and repentance. We'll be offering ashing, and it is the start of something longer and bigger that we hope that you will join in. Ruth, could I just have the next slide? So this is our 24-hour vigil outside the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero in Whitehall. And so again, London, possibly quite a long way for some of you, but it is really important that we come out onto the streets to show the government what feeling and strength of feeling from across the country there is on this issue. 24 hours, you can join at any point. You can stay for as long as you want. We're hoping that people will spend the night outside on the pavement at Whitehall, but we know that this is not for everybody. So come during the day, come on the Wednesday evening, we'll be having the climate choirs coming at about 5 o'clock, 5:15. and that will be an opportunity to really speak to the people who work in Whitehall, the politicians, the civil servants, and you'll find more information about that and all the other events that we will hope that might take place during this 24-hour vigil when we get together a program. So 12 noon on Wednesday the 6th, put that in your diary, right through to 12 noon on Thursday, the Wednesday the 5th, sorry, to Thursday the 6th of March. Now, accepting that that is a very long way for lots of you to come for a short time, we'd like you to look at our opportunities to pray and to keep vigil in your own communities. We're going to share the resources for the service, and we're going to share prayers that you can use, and we will have resources about how to run a vigil in your own community. These will all be available from about 2 weeks before the 5th of March, the 19th, by the beginning of next week, 19th February, and you'll be able to download orders of service and parts of service that you can use in your own Ash Wednesday events. You might want to run your own service as a whole. We'll have a folder with all these resources, including downloadable and printable placards that you can take to outside your MP's offices or your town centre to pray for and to witness to the need for our MPs to do the right thing, to put pressure on the government to end all new oil and gas. We also have an online prayer room. We'll be setting that up with 24/7 prayer, and that will be available for anyone who wants to join the vigil from the comfort of their own homes. And in a moment, I think Barbara will put into the chat the link where you can find all these resources. They will be available on the Green Christian website, and the link will be to the page for all these resources. The next thing you can do, and the link is again on the website, is to sign this petition, which asks the government to stop all new drilling, end all new licensing, and come up with a plan for workers and supply chains and communities. Because the one thing that we recognize, particularly as people of faith, is that people cannot be left behind in this transition. It has to be a just transition. We're also asking you to engage with your MPs on this issue. Maybe we could have the next slide. I won't go into that, and you've heard a bit from Lauren about that. You could write a letter, engage with them on social media, arrange a meeting. There are lots of ways of engaging with your MP. You can do it during that week of action. You can start doing that now. Ruth, could I have the last slide? There is something else that's really important and underlies everything that we do. And we're asking you to pray, not just during this vigil that we've got, but pray now. Pray for the outcome of the consultations. Pray for people's hearts and minds to be changed. Pray for our politicians to open their hearts to hear us. And pray for the end of all oil and gas and the renewal of the earth. I've galloped through that because we were running so far behind. I knew that we had to leave at least 5 minutes for question and answer. I'm really sorry that I couldn't make that any shorter, but I'm going to hand it back to you, Lorna.
Thank you. Thanks, Melanie. No, that was wonderful. And I think you really talked us through all those different ways in which we as Christians can come together in very, very practical ways in the very near future that we can all get involved. So I'm sure after the webinar, your slides will be shared and people can then start to log on and to see how we can actually practically help to continue to come together. So there are quite a few questions. So if we could spotlight everybody who was speaking. Unfortunately, Bishop Rosemarie had to leave us, but if we could have everybody back on the spotlight who was speaking. So the first question is, I don't know who they're from, but the first one is, in the news today that Equinor is cutting its green investment in half as a reaction to Rosebank decision, perhaps. Can the campaign extend to respond to this? So maybe Susie and Lauren, if you could just briefly speak to that point. Can the campaign respond to that decision to cut the investment?
Yeah, I can start on that one. We work quite closely with a number of organisations that are based in Norway to have a focus on Equinor specifically. Equinor feels slightly unusual as an oil company compared to a lot of the other big ones that people will be very familiar with. Because they are majority owned by the Norwegian public, and the Norwegian sentiment around Equinor is very different to how the public feels about other large oil companies, perhaps in the UK. Equinor has, in the past couple of years, tried to brand itself as a broad energy company in the UK, and they have done, I think, quite a lot of greenwashing. So they like to talk about the wind projects that they have. They never talk about the fact that they are aggressively expanding their oil and gas production around the world in a number of countries where the people there also don't want them in their seas, destroying their wildlife. We weren't surprised, I think, by the announcement that they were rolling back on their renewables, but it is incredibly disappointing to see them talking about it in such a flippant manner. So I think, thank you very much for the question, because I do think it is something that we are going to keep focusing on. Equinor are still very much a target of the campaign.
Wonderful, thank you. So another question is around how can we help those in the church in the USA provide an effective witness and challenge to Trump's anti-climate policies as they become ever more clear? Who would like to take that one? That's a really tricky one, but maybe somebody has some suggestions or answers. Anybody?
I'm happy to have a bit of a stab.
Yeah. Just a reflection is fine.
I think it's important to recognise that we need to get our own house in order first. We need to have our own churches and our own spheres of influence kind of addressing these issues before we begin to look at what's happening in America. I think those churches are hunkering down for survival, those that are on side, and we will need to reach out a hand of friendship to them. But right now, I think we should be focusing on ourselves and just give it a bit of time to settle down.
Thanks, Melanie. And just to say, there are a lot of organisations doing similar work to what you're doing, and we're doing, not you, but we are doing in the UK, are doing internationally. I know Laudato Si Movement, there's Green Faith, there's the Catholic Climate Covenant, and there's many others who are working around these issues in the US and increasingly looking at how do they join forces. But I think even sharing the story of Rosebank and the success is really important. But yeah, and I think, of course, praying for I think all of us praying for the situation, because it's very, very challenging for climate activists now, even in terms of the charitable work and the space to operate is really challenging in the US. Maybe one last question on so local Barclays are opening hubs in church premises, including eco churches. How can this be discouraged? It's kind of related to tonight. I guess it's about consistency of message. But does anybody have any advice to the person who asked this question on how they might address the question of Barclays opening up in church hubs?
I'm going to pitch in there because I think that's a really good question, and I think we need to engage with churches, particularly if they're eco churches. So go in, have a conversation with them. Try the vicar or priest of the church. Try the hall manager. Find out why they're doing this, and explain what Barclays do in terms of climate finance. And then if they won't listen, they will just carry on, because that's what we've come up against. You'll have to be persistent. Persistence will pay off, but we've got to be faithful. But yes, engage, definitely. Don't let it slide.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I think that's really wise advice. And I think that persistence is really important in all of this work. So maybe time for one more before we close. And as I said, the Zoom room is going to stay open for another 15 minutes for people who want to chat to each other. So this one is, are there opportunities, potential connections between stopping the new oil fields and the blue hydrogen projects led by multinational oil companies such as Eni? These are linked to human rights issues in Mozambique, undertaking a 3 billion carbon capture and storage hydrogen project in Liverpool Bay. This might require a longer response, but I'm just wondering, Susie, do you know much about that? And would you have some advice to offer in terms of how it connects with blue hydrogen and carbon storage?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It isn't something that the Stop Rosebank campaign is focusing on or mobilising on at the moment, but I think there is a number of grassroots groups that are mobilising locally around some of these really big, expensive hubs that are getting investment put into them. It's a really untested technology, and it's not going to fix the oil and gas issue. It's not going to fix the emissions issue. And we can't use it as a sticking plaster and let the oil and gas industry carry on business as usual, because scientists have said it simply won't work. But it is a really good question, and I think it's an emerging thing that is going to be increasingly in the news over the coming months. So I might have a chat with some colleagues and see if I can find some helpful resources to share on that for a bit more detailed info.
Thank you, Susie. So thank you to all of our speakers this evening. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions, but I know the questions are in the Q&A, and afterwards we can see with the organisers whether there's a possibility to answer those questions in writing and maybe circulate them to the people who attended. I didn't ask them in advance, but I've seen that done before, so I'm sure it would be possible to do that. It just takes a few minutes. So we've come to the end of this evening, and before we go our separate ways, let's pause to say a prayer. So, dear Lord, you are God of all creation. Thank you for bringing us together this evening. Thank you for all who have spoken with such wisdom, and all of us who've listened. Your creation is crying out. May we continue to journey together, meeting people where they are at and bringing many people with us in journeying towards the justice of your kingdom. May we have the courage to speak your truth to power on ending fossil fuels, so that many hearts may be opened and moved to change. And we ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord and Saviour. Amen. Thank you to everybody, and we look forward to seeing where this fantastic campaign and essential campaign goes next.